Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for March 8th, 2022 from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. There was a dusting of snow on the first half of the boardwalk when I arrived in the morning, and the bay is continuing to open up, although there is still some ice, especially towards the end of the boardwalk. Overall, the day today was partly to mostly sunny, and overall it was cold with a moderate west-northwest wind. So not terrible conditions. It was ended up being a fairly good day. Let's take a look at some bird photos. Here we have an adult male northern harrier. Remember, it's only the adult males that are this real silver color or gray. They call them gray ghosts. Here we have the underside view of the same bird, and we can notice a few things. For one, notice the bright yellow eye. And notice that the underside, the head is gray, but the body is white and has a little bit of orange dotting underneath. And the one distinctive field mark you can look for is that the secondary feathers have black tips. So this black bar is made up from the tip of these feathers. Very distinctive. Here is a male common Merganser, which I don't have much to say about it other than I think that their shape is kind of funny, and I like the way that their feet just kind of dangle at the very back. And here we have a male hooded Merganser doing his best to look handsome for the ladies. Here we have a male ring-necked duck. So a couple things we can look at. We have this nice white outline to the bill. The head in this light shows us a nice purple color. And we can see a little bit of the ring that gives it the name ring-necked duck. And we can also tell it apart from the scaup because these feathers here are all gray. On a lesser scaup, these secondary feathers would be white, and on a greater scaup, the secondaries and some of the primaries would be white. So since it's all gray, that's another field mark that we know it's a ring-necked duck. Here we have a juvenile bald eagle, juvenile meaning it's in its first year, so born last spring or summer. We know it's a juvenile because of the dark head and also the dark underside to the body, and the fact that the trailing edge of the wings is completely even. There are no feathers that are longer. You might be wondering how we tell young bald eagles from golden eagles. So the one main thing is how big the head is. The head is much larger on bald eagles than on golden eagles. Another thing to look for is the white on the underside. So see how messy this white looks? There's white here, there's a white bar here, there's some white here, there's white here. Just very messy looking. Whereas golden eagles, when they have white on the underside, it's very clean and it's organized in the middle of the wings and the base of the tail. So whenever you have these really disorganized white patches, that's a sign that it's a bald eagle. And also the white here in what we could call the wing pit area, the armpit area. Whenever you see white in this area, that means it's a bald eagle rather than a golden eagle. So often when we see a bald eagle from a distance, when we see this white here, we know, okay, it's just a bald eagle. It's not a golden eagle. And of course, we support that with other field marks as well, but that's one that is often you get a glimpse of as the bird is changing postures. Here we have an adult Cooper's hawk. So Cooper's hawks are accipiters along with northern goshawks and sharp-shinned hawks. The thing that's special or unique about accipiters is they have long tails, and also their wings are pretty long and skinny. So just the overall shape. It's very different from the buteos like red-tailed hawks, which are more stocky looking with shorter tails. We know that this is a Cooper's hawk because it has a fairly large head, and the tail is a bit rounded because the outer tail feathers are shorter than the central tail feathers. This bird was also doing what you could call a courtship flap or a territorial flap, and it's a thing that you'll see Cooper's hawks do when they're protecting their territory. So let's say another Cooper's hawk came into their territory and they're trying to chase it off. So what they do is they do a very exaggerated wing flap where their wings go up very high and they also flap a lot slower. So I think it just gives them the impression that they're a much larger bird than they actually are. And we can see that this bird also has its white undertail coverts fluffed out. And that's very common to see when they're doing that territorial behavior. And one thing you want to be careful of is some people see these fluffed out undertail coverts and they mistake it for the white rump of a northern harrier. So be careful if you're seeing white, make sure it is the white rump if you're going to call it a harrier, and that it's not just a Cooper's hawk fluffing out these undertail coverts, which are not just underneath but can also be on the side of the tail. And we know this is an adult Cooper's hawk rather than a juvenile because it has this orange barring underneath. Juvenile Cooper's hawks have a vertical brown streaking. Here we have an adult female northern harrier, and we already saw the adult male, which is that distinctive gray or silver plumage. For northern harriers, both the adult females and the juveniles of both sexes are what we call the brown types. We know that this is an adult female because of the streaking here on the upper breast, and also the markings in this area of the wing. Later we'll see an example of a juvenile, and we'll see that it does not have this streaking or the markings in this area. Here we have a classic adult red-tailed hawk. If there's one image you want to burn into your brain, it is this one. Learn the markings, learn the shape, and actually for learning Raptor ID, it's good to have something like a red-tailed hawk as your starting point. So when we say a Cooper's hawk has a long tail, it's in relation to a red-tailed hawk or in comparison to a red-tailed hawk. So again, the field marks we're looking for a red-tailed hawk, besides the shape, are these patagial bars in the shoulder areas, and also the belly band. And this is an adult, so it has a dark trailing edge to the wing, although in this photo you can't really see it that well, just because of the lighting conditions, so be careful about that. Sometimes when the bird is backlit, you can't see the dark trailing edge to the wing, but obviously this bird has the red tail. Here we have a common raven, and you might be wondering, how do we tell a raven from a crow? And I would say the first thing that stood out to me when I saw this bird, and actually there was a pair of them, was just how large of a bird it was. So you get an impression of that just by when the bird is moving around, when the bird is flapping, it's a slower flap. And also on ravens, their head looks a bit bigger. They also have a shaggy throat, although in this photo you can't see it very well. Another thing is the tail shape. It's sort of a diamond shape. So you can see it's up, and then these outer tail feathers are actually relatively short. You can imagine if it closed its tail, this feather would only come out about this far. So the central tail feathers are much longer. But it's that diamond shape, or they sometimes call it a wedge-shaped tail. And of course, when they call, they have a deeper croaking call compared to the higher pitched call of the American crow. Also, if you see it soaring on a thermal to gain altitude, that's a good sign that it's a raven, because you don't really see crows doing that. Sometimes you see crows circle a little bit in the wind, but actually soaring on a thermal is something that ravens do. This bird was really, really high up, and I'm surprised I even spotted it. This is an adult red-shouldered hawk, so we can get a hint of the orange on the underside. Although from that altitude, it's really hard to see that sometimes. The one thing that stands out even from this distance is the pale crescents near the wingtips. These are translucent spots on the feathers, and it's one of the most distinctive field marks on red-shouldered hawks, and both adults and juveniles have that field mark. So it's these pale crescents near the wingtips. Also the tail, we see that the tail looks black with thin white lines across it, like lines on a chalkboard. In about another month, we'll start seeing broad-winged hawks as well, and they have kind of a similar tail, but instead of the thin white lines, they have one broad white band across the tail. And one more small note, I've mentioned before that red-shouldered hawks have very squared off or blunt wingtips, but if you look at this photo, it's more of a pointed wingtip. And that's because this bird is not soaring, this bird is gliding. So many birds, when they glide, their wingtips look a little bit more pointed, just as they're adjusting their posture to be able to glide. So when birds are soaring, they're trying to get the maximum surface area. So they spread their tail and they spread their wings as wide as possible. When they're gliding, they're trying to be more aerodynamic as they move forward. So just be careful about that field mark, because later on, when we see broad-winged hawks, we'll talk about how pointed their wingtips are compared to red-shouldered hawks. Here we have a northern harrier high overhead, and this is just a good silhouette to learn. Harriers can look like a mix of other birds because they have very long, skinny wings that sometimes look very pointed, but their tail is also very long. And a lot of birders may be more used to seeing harriers down low, hunting over grasslands or marshes. And so when they start seeing northern harriers up high, they're not familiar with that silhouette because you're not seeing the typical field marks such as the dihedral or the V shape of the wings and the white rump. So just learn this silhouette so you're not confused when you see one in the field. Here's another adult red-tailed hawk. This one is in more of a glide posture. And again, we see these dark patagial bars, although they're not super dark on this one. This bird is a bit more lightly marked. And we see that belly band. And again, it's a bit fainter on this bird. And it's an adult, so we have the dark trailing edge to the wing. And we have the red tail. Although in this lighting condition, it's hard to really see the tail color, but it looks faintly orange. Here we have another juvenile bald eagle. So how do we know this isn't a golden eagle? Well, it's got a big head, and it's got white in the wing pit area. So that's the first thing that would stand out to me to call this a bald eagle. And again, you see that there's a lot of kind of very messy, scattered white on the underside of the wings compared to if it was a golden eagle and it had white on the underwings, it would just be in very neat patches in the center of the wings. And we also see that there's no signs of molt. All the wing feathers appear to be about the same length, although with this posture, it's not as straightforward because these feathers are angled back so far. And again, with the juvenile bald eagles, dark head and dark underside to the bodies. Usually the second and third year birds would have a whiter underside to the body. Here we have another adult red-shouldered hawk, and this one is in a soaring posture. So soaring on a thermal, trying to gain altitude. And in this one, we do see the wingtip is a bit more squared off or blunt. And we can see faintly those translucent crescents, pale crescents. And again, we see the tail pattern where it's got the thin white stripes on it. The continuing northern shrike is still around. And actually, after I left the Hawk Watch, I went over to the Owl Woods and I saw a shrike near the Owl Woods parking lot. So I'm not sure if that would be the same individual that we're seeing at Braddock Bay Park or not. But there's definitely at least one shrike, maybe two in the area. So this photo isn't very good because it was taken from very far away, but this is the season's first eastern meadowlark. And I was able to identify it. First of all, I saw this bird in flight, and meadowlarks have a very distinctive way of flapping. Their flaps are very shallow and they're very stuttery. It's not an even up and down flap. It's more of just a downward flap, and they do a stutter flap. And when you see that, it's one of the most distinctive field marks because we don't really have any other birds that fly that way. I would say the closest bird in terms of silhouette to meadowlarks are European starlings. But with the meadowlarks, look for that stuttery flap. The other thing you can look for is this bird is facing away, so we're seeing its back. So we're not seeing the yellow on the front. We're seeing the brown back of the bird. But even from this distance, we can see the white outer tail feather. That's what that little white line is there. The outer tail feathers on meadowlarks are white. So you can notice that from quite a distance when they're in flight as well. Here's just another classic red-tailed hawk, this one in a glide posture. First of all, just look at that shape. Typical buteo in a glide. Fairly broad wings, relatively short tail. We know it's a red tail because it's got these dark patagial bars and the belly band. And we can also see the dark trailing edge to the wing that lets us know it's an adult. And you can't really see the tail color that well, but if we could, it would be red. Here we have a light-morph rough-legged hawk. And the one distinctive thing about rough legs are just these square patches on the wings. We don't really see that on any of our other hawks. And on the juveniles like this, you have these really dark bellies. It's not the belly band like we see on an adult. This is just like someone took a big thick marker and colored in this whole area. We know it's a juvenile because it has a faint trailing edge to the wing rather than bold. And instead of a bold tail band at the tip, it just has this very diffuse dark color. Here's a great example of a juvenile northern harrier. And remember, we saw the adult male earlier that was that silver or gray color. Then we saw the adult female, which looked kind of similar to this, except the adult female has a lot of streaking on the upper breast and more markings up here in the shoulder area. So what we see with these juveniles is that they're just very plain underneath. We don't have any of that streaking like the female had, and we don't have any of the markings in this area. And in the fall, these birds can look quite orange, but usually by the spring they've faded a little bit. So you can see it still looks a little bit orange, but really from a distance this would just look pale underneath. Here we have an adult bald eagle carrying a stick. So this would be the eagle carrying this as nesting material, going to either build a new nest or probably more likely just modify last year's nest, rebuild it a little bit, make sure that it's ready to go for this year. Here we have an Iceland Gull, and whenever I'm looking through gulls, the first thing I'm looking for is the wingtips. Most of our gulls are ring-billed gulls and herring gulls, and the adults of those species have dark wingtips, black wingtips. And so I'm always looking for birds that have white wingtips like this, because that's how you find your Iceland gulls and your glaucous gulls. Now we know this is an Iceland gull just because I could tell the size was a little bit smaller, and there is a little bit of gray at the wingtips, although with this photo the bird was very backlit from the sun. But if I were to darken this photo quite a bit, you could get a sense that there's some gray near the wingtips, which glaucous gull would not have, but Iceland gull does have. Also, the bill is relatively small. Glaucous gulls have kind of big heads and big honking bills on them. So Iceland gulls, sometimes they say it's more of like a dove-like look, kind of a smaller head, more of a cute looking head and a smaller bill. And the last photo from today, and a good bird to end on, this is a juvenile peregrine falcon. And this bird came in the afternoon and was actually harassing a northern harrier and a rough-legged hawk. And we know this is a peregrine falcon. First of all, just from the size, it was a big falcon. So much bigger than we'd see on a kestrel or a merlin. Kestrels, of course, have very different plumage. Merlins have a more similar plumage to peregrine falcons, so they're more easily confused. But this was a big falcon. We see that it has very pointed wings, like all falcons do. These markings on the face, sometimes they call them mustache markings. They're very distinctive on peregrines. We know this is a juvenile because if this bird were perched upright, the streaking would be vertical. On the adult peregrines, they have horizontal barring. If we take a look at the eBird checklist, which I'll put a link to in the description, we see that we had 44 species today, which is more than it felt like, but really I guess there were a lot of species of ducks on the bay that helped us get the total up. And if we take a look at HawkCount, we see our totals for the day for migrating raptors were 5 turkey vultures, 5 bald eagles, 5 northern harriers, 1 sharp-shinned hawk, 1 Cooper's hawk, 2 red-shouldered hawks, 9 red-tailed hawks, 2 rough-legged hawks, and 1 peregrine falcon, for a total of 31 migrants today. The only new species for the season was eastern meadowlark. And one other report I wanted to show you from today, this comes from Bocas Ridge in Panama, and today they had 31,489 turkey vultures. And to put that in perspective, that's about the number of turkey vultures that we get over the course of our entire season. And we're a pretty high total compared to most hawk watches. So to be getting tens of thousands of birds in one day, that's pretty impressive. And you'll also notice under observers, Carl Barden, who you might recognize that name because in the previous 3 years, he was the counter at the Derby Hill Hawk Watch. And if we take a look at the forecast, tomorrow will be cloudy with rain and snow showers, high of 4 Celsius, winds light and variable. So a couple of days ago, they were projecting that tomorrow would be good, but the forecast has kind of deteriorated as we've gotten closer. So yeah, now it looks like that tomorrow won't be that great of a day. We lost our southwest winds, too much precipitation, so probably won't be too many migrants tomorrow. For Thursday, we're looking at overcast with a high of 3 Celsius, winds northwest at 10 to 15 kilometers per hour. So kind of similar today, other than it looks like it'll be more cloudy. So I would still just expect light migration, maybe a little bit of migration, but not a huge amount. Friday, cloudy with snow showers developing in the afternoon, high 3 Celsius, winds east-northeast at 10 to 15 kilometers per hour. So those aren't very good winds for us, and with snow showers, I would expect not too much migration. All right, well, sorry for such a long video today, but there were a lot of photos that I wanted to talk about and point out some identification features. If you found this video useful and would like to support the channel, please hit the like button and consider leaving a comment. And be sure to subscribe to the channel and also hit the notification bell so that you get a notification every time a new video is uploaded. This is David B. Thanks for watching.